joined by the one and only Noni Kumalo. Noni, good evening.
Good evening, Supta. How are you?
I'm all right. Earlier on, I said you are not going to be here, but we're not going to discuss those. I'm glad that
We're here now.
Here.
We're here now. Your ancestors are very strong. They're like, we need Noni for this one.
Yeah. Shout out to them, the ancestors. We're chatting Fostercare tonight, and we want to talk all things Fostercare in South Africa. And joining me in studio is Pippa Jarvis, who serves as the managing director of TLC and Empoverished Village, which is nestled within the vibrant community of Walkerville in the south of Johannesburg.
Yes, Supta. And for the past 30 years, she's been privileged to walk alongside the noble mission of TLC and a haven for abandoned babies and children in need.
I've always heard about foster care. I've always heard about adoption. Now we are just going to dig deeper into this amazing sector that is there in South Africa. Pippa, good evening. Welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you so much. I'm privileged to be here.
It's an honor to have you, and thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. Before we talk about TLC and the amazing work that you do at Empoverished Village, where does the passion and purpose for foster care come from?
I was born to do this work. I don't know anything else. I have a passion for building the world I want to live in, and every day I get to do that. So I count myself as one of the luckiest people, getting to do a job that I love every day, even though it's really tough sometimes. I still just I can't get enough of it.
What keeps you going?
I think the idea that we actually all have power. I think people forget that they have to act like life is a verb. You have to do life. It does, otherwise it just walks all over you. So I'm one of those people who just feels like, what can I give today? What have I got energy for? And I just do that thing. I just focus on that thing. I don't try and do more than I can manage. I'm very humble about the fact that I'm not, a solo flyer. But I love the idea that we can make a difference in some small way every day, and we should be doing that. So.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And again, Supta, before we jump into the incredible work that they do, perhaps let's start defining, some of these terms, because there's foster care and there's adoption.
Yeah.
Can you perhaps just take us through those terms?
Sure. They are two very different things, although I know they get kind of mixed into people's languages. So foster care is temporary. People need to recognize that. And when they go into foster care, they must understand that the idea of foster care in itself is temporary. The idea is that children will be taken through a process, a journey from their... So they will have at some point been separated from their biological family, which meant they need alternative care. Foster care is one of those strategies. But your foster care order is only in place for 2 years. And then the court is duty bound to keep renewing that if they're going to stay with you. But the goal in those 2 years is actually to reunite the child with its biological family as far as possible. So it's a hard thing for families to get invested for 2 years knowing that there's going to be an end date. But if they don't do that, then people get broken. And that's why foster care has quite a bad rap. From the parent side as well as from the children's side, everybody ends up more broken than they started off, which is a shame. And we can maybe delve into a little bit of the trickiness of foster care later. Adoption for children who are removed from their biological families is a permanent solution. So that's only ideal if the family is never an option for reunification. So if your family is never going to be available to you because they've deceased or they were in such a, like a dire circumstance that they cannot or will never be able to parent you, like maybe you've got mental health issues or something like that in your family and your parents can't then reattach to you, then adoption is of course your number one bet. To be raised in a secure belonging space for the rest of your life is best for children, that stability. Foster care doesn't really give you that stability, so it's quite a different animal.
Okay. How does the process work in terms of foster care in South Africa?
So the law is has very little restriction in terms of that. You only have to be 18, believe it or not.
What?
18, healthy, willing and able. Those are the criteria. 18, healthy.
Wait. So they don't look at your financial capacity?
Well, I think that falls under the able part, right? So
okay.
Of course you have to be able. So they want to know that you're going to be able to take care of the child. Remember, there is a grant. It isn't much. So families families must recognize that. It's 1,180 Rand a month. So you can't really raise a child on that. Anyone who's had children can tell you that won't get you very far in a month.
Yeah.
So you need to go into this with your eyes wide open, right? It can't be a financial incentive that drives you to this. And in fact, it can't be any motivation from yourself. It has to be about the needs of the child. Foster care is there as a service to meet the needs of a child who's in need. It's not about the parent. And often that also gets misunderstood, is that parents are looking for a child to try on for size. So they'll have foster care because it's temporary, and if it doesn't work out, they know they can put the child back into the system. But just imagine from the child's perspective what that feels like, right?
Sure.
So it's really not okay
Yeah.
when we look at foster care from what our needs are rather than what does the child need. Children need belonging, they need stability, they need true relationships, they need safety. Those are the jobs of the adults in their lives to provide. And when our biological families fail to provide that, we need a proxy. We need someone who can stand up and say, I'm going to do that for you, because human beings to thrive need those things.
Yeah.
Right? So foster care has to always be looked at from the point of view that what is best for this child for now. And that's why it's temporary. It says, well, best for you is actually to be with a stable, loving family, which should be your own. So let's try and get them to that place. And we'll just do temporary care until you can do that. But there's not enough investment going into families and re-establishing security in families. So we're having this constant cycling through of children in foster care where they move from one foster family to another as soon as problems arise. And it's really not a good thing.
I can imagine, especially for the development of the child, especially if they're younger.
It's devastating.
I can
It's
imagine.
devastating.
Yeah.
Children just want to know where they belong. They want to know that they're safe.
Yeah.
And foster care, unfortunately, especially when you're in that repetitive cycle, it just continually breaks your trust in people. And it's really problematic.
Pippa, you speak about there not being enough security. Can you elaborate more on what you mean by that?
So human beings are herd animals. You know, they need community. They need to belong in a space. And security, when I talk about security, I mean emotional, psychological, mental security. I mean that I know for sure you've got my back. When the chips are down, you've got my back. And parenting is tough, especially parenting children from difficult places, because that trust has already been broken. And children want to constantly test whether or not you're going to be there, if you're going to actually honor your words. So if my parents, who were biologically obliged to look after me, failed, now I have a proxy parent. Everything I do is going to be to test whether or not they're actually in it for the long haul. And it's hard for families, right? Because when you bring a child into your home, you expect they're going to be grateful for what you give them. You're going to expect that they're going to, be happy that now they've got a stable, loving family with a roof over their heads and 3 meals a day. If that wasn't what they were familiar with, they're going to continually test if that's going to stay that way.
Sure.
So then it feels like a betrayal. It feels a bit like ingratitude.
Yeah.
And it starts to tell a story to the new parents that, they don't like me, and, they're so ungrateful. They want what they knew before. But that's actually how human beings are. Even something that's not good for us, if it's what we know, then we choose it over and over again because we understand it. So children from neglect or children from abuse, they often really put up a lot of a fight to just be in a stable situation. And that's about how safe am I? Am I safe? Are you going to at some point throw your chips in and say, no, this is too much for me? And sadly, because the adults aren't capacitated, there's a thing called social and emotional learning. We don't do that well in our communities in modern times. And as the adult who's taking responsibility for a broken child, we have to have extra resources, extra tools in our toolkit. And if we don't have a way to access that well, then we do, unfortunately, let the kids down. And then they do start to see, they're not dependable, they're inconsistent, they're mean when I'm dysregulated, we call it. So when I'm behaving badly, they don't see that as a need that's not being met. They just see that as naughty behavior. At Embrace, we often use the mantra that needy isn't naughty, right? And naughty is often needy. When a child is behaving badly, it's usually because there's a need not being met.
Yeah.
But foster care families aren't given the training they need. Foster care and adoption really are specialist skills.
Yeah.
You need to be specially equipped for that kind of care. Children who have been broken, it's like trying to put together a really fragile, fine piece of art. You can't just take it and pluck it together with press stick. It's not going to reach its potential. You have to be able to do it with finesse, with proper grace, with proper technique. And there's a lot of science around how to do that well, but there's not a lot of support for doing it well. It can be costly. It's very time consuming. It requires huge commitment. And families need to come together and be able to support each other. And that's why we call ourselves a village, because you really can't do this on your own. Anyone who thinks they can parent a child on their own successfully is deluding themselves. Raising kids is hard. The world is out there to kind of strike you down, and kids from difficult places have even more of that. They're so vulnerable to judgment, to shame, to blame. And those things are crippling for the human soul. The moment we bring shame, blame into our conversations and into our relationships, we really just constrain their ability to ever reach their potential.
I'm glad you shared that with us, because there could be a family or parents that were thinking of being foster parents. They also need to understand, the difficulties that come with being a foster parent, not only physically and financially, but also emotionally and mentally. Let's talk about the tricky part that you touched on earlier on. I'm interested in also understanding what's so tricky with being a foster parent and foster care.
I think it's because loving actually does come naturally to human beings. And so when you bring a child into your family, children are easy to love. That's kind of how they're made. They are created for us to love them. And then we invest. And when we invest emotionally, letting go is really hard. And again, one of these kind of mantras we use is loving to let go. The idea that you have to love them to death, like you have to love them and love them and love them, but then you have to accept the fact that at some point they're going to walk out the door. It's really, really hard to do, right? It's not something that people are equipped to do well. But if we were in community and we understood what that looked like, we could support each other better, and it wouldn't leave such a hole in our hearts. But people often say, oh, well, you chose to do foster care. That's the burden you should carry, right? And it's hard.
That's hard.
It's hard. And we really don't do community well anymore. Our modern life has kind of eroded a lot of that. But we need to get back to the place where we can say, look, I recognize you're going to do this amazing job. You're going to take a kid in who's really in a troubled situation, but you're not going to do it alone. I'm going to be there for you. And maybe I will be the one who's the auntie who comes every Friday and just takes the kid out for a milkshake so you can have a break, right? Or the same way you would for your family member. If your family member had a child with special needs, let's say, you would be able to say, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to relieve a little bit of that pressure from you. This is the same. These children from difficult places are children with special needs. They have special emotional needs. And those emotional needs have to be met by a community. They can't be met by one individual on them by themselves. Of course, consistent relationships are important. You can't just have like 50 people trying to raise your child. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that we have to find out what's our special gift we can give to that relationship. Maybe it's being a granny, maybe it's being an auntie, maybe it's being the mother's best friend and having nothing to do with the child. Right? It's got to be a collective effort, because our hearts are complicated things, and our brains are part of that. So when a child's brain is being developed, we have the first thing that develops is your primal brain, your primitive brain, the part that just keeps your body working. The next is your emotional brain, and only finally after that is developed is your learning brain, the brain that allows you to access like proper deep thinking. Children who have experienced trauma, they sit in their primal and their emotional brain. They very seldom can access their learning brain. And so what happens is in relationships, they're functioning always like emotional, like fleas. They jump from emotion to emotion, and then the emotion drives the behavior. It's not reason. It's not rationality. It's all emotional. Adults who have been and can be supported to understand that can start to bring interventions that allow kids, and I liked you used your wusa moment. I was listening on the way here, right?
It goes a long way, right?
It goes a long way.
Beautiful stuff. Thank you,
So
Pippa.
it's about regulation, right?
Yeah.
Regulating your emotions, regulating your body. Children need that from the early stages, and they learn it from adults. But if the adults don't do it well in their environment, and a kid is completely dysregulated, the adult can't give them the tools they need to function. And unless they can do that, they'll never reach the potential that they have inside of them, because they'll always be just like these little ADD bots, They'll be running around from emotion to emotion, from impulse and spontaneity, never forethought, never planning. It's really problematic for kids. And in relationship building, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
So trauma has a big impact on our ability to develop relationships and on our ability to learn. We see it in schools. I'll just draw an example. We have 2 children at the moment that we're educating at home because they were both in mainstream schooling. They had both experienced early childhood trauma, and they were struggling really very much to access the normal academic pathway, and they were falling further and further behind their peers. Now, the mainstream schooling, it's under a lot of pressure, and kids who have special educational needs, immediately get shifted to the side and get given or assigned special numbers, like special learners numbers for children with special educational needs, which allows them to access the special education channels. But these kids aren't intellectually disabled. They're emotionally disabled, so to speak.
Yeah.
They've got emotional challenges, and there's no middle ground.
Yeah.
Once you've got that number, your whole educational journey is directed along the special needs, like kind of path.
Yeah.
And you never really access mainstream again. And we need a bridging space. We need a space where kids can come, where they can learn to regulate so that they can access their learning brain, because then they'll learn fine. But schools are not that place, right? Schools are full of shouting teachers and lots of chaos and bullying students, and kids with emotional, they just shut down, and that learning part of their brain just goes out of the window, and they just react. And that's not going to be good for our country. It's not going to be good for the world. So we're trying to start a new narrative to say, okay, well, how do we meet their needs where they are? Not look at grades, not look at ages. Let's look at what are we dealing with in reality with this individual. Give them the tools they need now, and then you'll see that they'll step up to the plate, right?
Yeah.
There's an interesting statistic that says children from bad trauma, you can follow their life's journey, and pretty much you can halve their age in terms of emotional response time. So if you have a 20-year-old who's really under terrible emotional stress, they'll behave like a 10-year-old. And you can see it in real life. If you go out and you look now at people who behave badly in social situations, people who have road rage, people who lose their sense of humor at the petrol station, things like that, you can usually say, okay, I wonder how much of that is trauma related and you haven't learned how to respond properly. So you're behaving like a teenager when actually you're 30 years old, but you're behaving badly. A lot of trauma comes out in bad behavior, even in adults. But the quicker we can address it in children and with the more effective tools, the better outcomes we can have for kids.
Pippa, trauma or no trauma, you mentioned it, and even your face lit up when you said that kids are so easy to love, right? But I want to play the devil's advocate here and say, I guess foster care is there, as you said, as a temporary arrangement to reunite kids with their parents. But when they found a secure, beautiful, and loving home, why do we then want to take these kids back to these abusive households?
It's terrible. So one of the challenges in foster care is that there's not enough effort made to do the reunification quickly. So there's not enough support put in. So then you end up invested for a much longer time. I mean, I've got children I've fostered since they were babies to now they're like 17, 18 years old, right? Sure. So reunification was not on the cards, not because it wasn't an option, but because there was no process unlocking that properly. And it's hard. Remember, now we're loving these babies, and the people that we see who hurt them become a threat in that. You know, like we don't want to be open to understanding what drove them to do the things they did. How did they end up in those situations? Children who can never be reunified have to be made available for adoption. It really is a hard decision, but it has to be made for the families and for the children, because then you can invest yourself 100%. You can't have a wishy-washy decision. It has to be, look, this neglect or this abuse or this situation was so bad that the child, I'm sorry, is not going to be able to come back to you. Not to say that you have to be cut out of their life forever, right? But you can't raise this child. And then you have to be able to assign a new parent to that child. But if that's not going to be the case, if you know, look, this mother had postpartum depression, let's use that as an example, which happens. She couldn't attach to her baby. The baby was removed because she wasn't feeding it. It was neglected. And now, 2-3 years later, the mother's managed to collect herself together. Now, how do you weigh up, right? The child has had 3 stable years with her family. And now you want to be able to say, well, the mother wants the child back. How do you make that equation work? There isn't really a way. Children, every effort must be made to support families before abandonment, before separation happens. Because if you don't, you're going to have brokenness all the way down the line. It's just it's unfortunate. It's just one of those tragedies. So a lot of Embrace Village's work actually is around how do we go upstream? How do we stop moms getting to that crisis point where separation from their baby looks like the only option? How do we keep them from abandoning, aborting, or giving their babies up for adoption? And the way to do that is to bring community around them. You have to bring community around them. You have to provide people they can talk to, people they can lean on, and it can't be one person because not everybody gels the same way. We all have our own energy. We all bring our own thing into relationships. I need elders in my village. I need women. I need men. I need youth. I need children. Because somewhere that'll unlock in the mother a heart that says, okay, maybe there is some hope. And if there's hope, she'll put in the effort. But the moment she's trapped at home, just imagine you have a baby, let's say you have a baby at the government clinic. You discharged after 12 hours. You're sent home on public transport to an informal settlement where you're living in a shack with no running water, sharing a bathroom. You've got to take care of your physical body after having this tremendous rupture, physically. Now you've got an infant who's demanding care. Every 2 hours you've got to wake up. You don't have support. You don't have food. You don't have an income. It's freezing cold outside. Like, what do people expect mothers to do? Right? That you're asking the impossible of a human being.
Yeah.
And so we have to change that. We have to have safe places mommies can give birth. We have to have loving arms for them to cry into when they're feeling like everything's a bit tough. And unfortunately, our country has gone through so much. But the HIV pandemic, the consequences of that are real now in families where mommies, almost all the mommies we meet, have lost their own mommies. Right? So they don't have that maternal
support structure.
Support. They don't have the wisdom to say, it's okay, the kid's just teething, and you'll get over it. Let me have the baby for a couple of hours. You just go sleep, it's okay. Who's doing that for our mummies? Right? No one's doing that. And then when the mummies start to lose their minds, because that's what happens, and then they forget what they're doing, or they drop their baby, or they, and then they get judged, and they get blamed, and they get shamed for being bad moms. And then there's no coming back, because now someone else has got your child, and now you've got to prove that you poor, uneducated, but willing mother are better than the stable foster family that's had your baby for 3 years. It's like an impossible equation.
It's an impossible equation.
So we have to do it better, and that's why we do Embrace Village, where we really try to bring vulnerable mothers into a community. And we love what we do, because at the moment we have 45 children coming every day to our crisis daycare center. When I say crisis daycare, it's for mothers who can't afford ECD. These are mommies who are unemployed, they don't have support, they can't get work because they're looking after their child, and they can't get their child looked after someone because they don't have work to pay for that. So they're stuck again in this trap, right? So we let them come to our daycare center, and we invite the mothers to come along. And we say, come spend the day with your baby. But while your baby's being looked after by our really excellent caregivers, we're going to build you. We're going to give you some food. We're going to give you some training. We're going to give you some community. And we're going to show you that you're worth something, right? That the world is better because you're in it. And then we start to build relationships between them, between their children and other children. And we start to knit together what is the social fabric. That's the whole, like, if you imagine that whole analogy of social fabric, it only works well when all the threads are tightly knit together. Right? The less woven it is, the more can get through. And you want it to be tight. You don't want it to be letting all the barbs through. You want to be able to hold people tightly. So it's really around that. It's around spending time in community with people. And sometimes that just looks like sitting and drinking tea together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Pippa, I like the fact that you touch on community quite a lot. Because it means it is really the foundation of not only Embrace Village, but also our communities, Where do you think, as a society, we've lost that community element? Because clearly it sounds as if that in our own social spaces, in our own communities, we've lost the community element.
Yeah. I think there's such a complex thing to unravel. I think apartheid did huge damage. I think that the destruction of the family started way back in early colonization, where fathers were forced to travel far distances for work. They lost contact with their families. Women ended up working again as domestics and things like that. They lost contact with their children. The children were raised by an elderly generation. Like, lots of things that broke that weave, like separated the weave. And then you had the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which just completely annihilated a whole generation, like that whole parenting strata. You know, you had your children now being raised by the elderly. Now those children are adult, but there's no adults or elderly for them to turn to. Like there's huge gaps in our fabric. So we have to start looking at each other, and we have to start looking at the youth, which is why I was so excited to come on this radio station, because I thought, you know, so often I end up on radio stations that are only listened to by old white people like me, and it's great, but it's not making the difference, right? It's not going to make the difference. What we need is for young people to stand up and recognize there were wounds and they were not good, but we can heal from them. And I think so much of our narrative is around the wounds and how not good they are. But then we don't do anything about the healing part, right? What are we bringing to this conversation? What are we bringing as the energy to say, not on my watch, right? Those kids are not going to go through that on my watch. I'm going to be different. I'm going to bring something to the party that's going to change even the lives of those around. And that's something else people must always recognize, is that we're not asked to change the world. That's not our job. Our job is to change the world we're in. Like, we are in this little world. I'm in Walkerville. I'm changing Walkerville because that's what I've decided. You can decide to change the world you're in. It doesn't require you to have hundreds of children. It doesn't require you to go, you know, spend all your money. All it requires is to wake up every day in the morning and say, the world's going to be better because I was in it today.
We're joined by Pippa Jarvis, who serves as the managing director of TLC and Empoverished Village from Walkerville, south of Johannesburg. If you've got any questions regarding foster care in South Africa, you can send that voice note on the Y app. Maybe you also had foster care parents when you were younger. Now you are an adult. We'd also like to hear your experience. Please send that voice note on the Y app. Let's take a quick break.
Good times happen to those who follow their own compass, live on their own terms, are born ready to make genuine connections, just like Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola. The ready-to-drink Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola is the perfect mix, just like the ones you can catch on All Girls on Deck. The taste of a perfect match. Born ready to enjoy. Tune into All Girls on Deck Saturdays at 6 on Y. Proudly served to you by Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola. Drink responsibly, not for persons under the age of 18.
YX24 is back. So zwagala, because we've got Gabza the Small, K-Mat, Moda, Zingumalo, and more. So get your gang together and unlock youth culture at Constitution Hill on the 12th of October. Tickets available at Web Tickets. Get 50% off if you use a qualifying Nedbank account to pay. Proudly brought to you by YouthX by Nedbank, a licensed FSP and registered credit provider. T's and C's apply.
Majida. Life is better with a little bit of spice. You're with the guys, enjoying the prize. You've got the captain, you've got the eyes. But something is missing, that thing that will just finalize. So you dunk the wings and thighs in your Captain for vibes. When you mix your Captain and eyes, dunk, munch, and enjoy the spice. Captain Morgan, however you spice on eyes. Not for persons under the age of 18.
It's the Lunch League on Y.
Our finalist for Be The Next has been given a task to come up with his own feature that we're going to play right here, my captain. So let's listen up. What's going on? Tell us, Ngundi.
This person spent most of his career playing in Europe for teams such as Ajax, Tottenham Hotspur, and Everton.
I don't even have to Google. Just Zaza.
It's the part where he said, I don't even have to Google.
That's Steven Pienaar, Wafit. Steven Pienaar, Naganjani.
That player is Steven Pienaar, and he was still playing for Everton at the time.
You know, when you're the one wrong person in a group project, and everybody else got it right, and we just played his voice note first. DJ Billionaire, I'm with you, man. It's just a Jaja in spirit. I understand.
Weekdays, 12 to 3 p.m. on Y.
Well, within Unlock Chats, remember, you can send that voice note on the Y app. We're talking foster care in South Africa. We're joined by Pippa Jarvis from TLC and Empoverished Village. Like I said, any questions, personal experience, always welcome on Unlock Chats.
Pippa, you've only just scratched the surface when you spoke about the incredible work that you do at Empoverished. Can you now take the opportunity to tell us about the amazing work that you do?
So it's my favorite place in the world, and everybody's invited to come and see it.
We'll be there.
There's nothing like seeing it in person. So we focus on several intersections. We call them intersections. We have our babies, which of course are drawn from our community of vulnerable families, and we really work hard on building good foundations, because when you've got the foundations right, right, everything else will fall into place. But if you do that badly, you're constantly trying to kind of catch up and fill in holes. So we really want to do that well. So we focus really strongly on our babies under 6. We have 45 of them who come every day. And then we have our children who were part of our children's home, who were not going to find permanent families. And so our family, because it's a family-run organization, actually adopted between us 35 children. So my mom 17, myself 14, my sister 5, and we are raising those kids in our community. Mostly they raise. My youngest is 10 now. And those are children in the village who are learning to be part of community who would otherwise never have had the opportunity. They would have been raised in an institution and for various reasons. So children who come into care come in for lots of different reasons. The ones we mostly got as TLC were children who were abandoned, a lot of them during the HIV/AIDS pandemic, so several of them were infected with HIV, or they had other special needs, or children of siblings. So children who come into the system on their own have a much higher likelihood of being placed because they're only one child. If you come in with a brother or a sister, or God forbid 2 or 3 or 4 of you, it's very, very difficult to find a permanent placement for all of you. So of the children I've adopted, I have several sibling sets, a sibling set of 4 and a couple of 2. And that's because children should be with their people, right? Everybody should belong to someone. And biology does that. It knits you together. And I'm not saying it's fail-safe. Of course, you have brothers and sisters who don't get along at all. But there is still that connection that says, this is someone I belong to, and we should be walking a journey together. Adoption allows you to do that. I mean, I've only had adopted children. I've never had a biological child, but I adore them. my four of my children are actually in this area, learning now at tertiary institutions here and living apart from the family, but growing up, really growing up. And they're going to be able to bring change to our country. And in a different way. They've been raised by a white mom, so there's a whole story there for them. It's lots of party tricks for them. How many brothers and sisters do they have?
Oh, many.
So it's a fun space to be in. But so embraces around the children. That's like our focus. But of course, children are nothing without community. Children get broken and lost if there's no adults to show them the way. They have to have footsteps to step into if they're going to find their way through life. They need somebody big and strong in front of them. We always say bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. Those are like critical parts of a grown-up's life in a child. Our job is to keep kids safe, to make it safe for them, and then they will walk the walk that keeps it safe. But if they don't know how to be safe because adults haven't shown them that way, then our country is never going to be safe. Because why? Why should they care about you if nobody cared about them? Why should they invest in you if nobody invested in them? Why should they care? So we have to answer that why really early on. And the better we do that, the more solidly and confidently we do that, the better that they will be as adults. And so a big part of our work now is around mothers and motherhood. In fact, I'll tell you the story of one of my sisters, adopted sisters. She came at age 13. She was pregnant, expecting a baby. She had her own horrific story getting there. But she came and she lived in our family for a while as we ran our children's home. She was too young to go into an unwed mother's home and too pregnant to go into a children's home. So she came to our family home because of the flexibility it offered. And in that time, we just loved her to pieces. She was such a amazing young person. And when she delivered her little girl, she asked, could she stay with us and could we keep them both together rather than separate the baby from her, which had been the original plan. The baby would go into adoption and she would go home. So we kept them together, and we did what is called allo parenting, where you parent basically the whole unit together. So the older child and the younger child gets parented together until the older child becomes an adult and is able to assume more responsibility. But her journey was so profound. She had come at 13 with a grade 4 farm school education, but she worked determinedly. She finished her own schooling. We got her a matric. She's done now 2 Montessori diplomas in education. She's done several certificates in play therapy. Now she heads up Embrace Villages ECD.
Wow. What a beautiful story.
Yeah. And her daughter's studying psychology just up the road here in Sandton. And it's a whole destiny, like a whole family's destiny. You've moved onto a new track. And for us, that was the catalyst, the inspiration for how do we invest in mommies properly so that their children can walk a new journey. And the mommies can free themselves of the trap of poverty, of shame, of blame, of disillusionment, to stand on their own feet. So a lot of what happens to these mommies is that they end up hooking their lives onto a provider because they don't have education and employment. So they hook their lives onto a provider. They fall pregnant. The provider leaves. Now they've got to make, a hustle for themselves, they often find a secondary provider. So now they're attached to a second person and they fall pregnant a second time. That second time is the break. It's too much. The mother can't be on her own with 2 children. It was one thing or with one. So now they're in the Solomon's choice. If they go to a pregnancy crisis care center, they can't take their older child with them because they're often not allowed, which means that child would have to go into care, or they'd have to carry their baby to term and then separate from the baby and keep the older child. It's like Solomon, you have to decide which baby you choose. And it's terrible. It's horrific. So our journey with my sister was really one that showed us that if you invest properly, you can keep the families together. So we've run a pilot for 6 mommies who have lived with us residentially, and all of them so far have kept their babies after delivery. Not that they were forced to, but that they felt like suddenly there was an option for them. And 4 of those 6 have actually had older children besides the new baby. So it really seems to be part of their journey. None of them have access to their biological birth mothers, so they all have that gap. They almost all have an older child. They've all ended up in these relationships of like breaking and breaking and breaking. And then they've ended up in this situation. So how do you take a parent through that journey? You make sure they're well looked after physically, mentally, and spiritually. You make sure that you give them the parenting tools they need, and then you equip them for employment. So you find what they're passionate about, you find what they're good at, and you just put investment into that, and then they can be entrepreneurs. They can be graduates. It just depends on what they want, right? So we've had a mommy who didn't want anything to do with schooling, and she's now running her own little events marketing company.
Nice.
We've had another one who arrived needing just a little bit of money to pay for her certificate. She had qualified with a diploma, but hadn't been able to pay for the finishing of her course. So she was stuck, not being able to get a job because she couldn't prove her qualification. So we were able to fundraise to find money to just pay for that. Now she's employed, she's got her child, everything is moving in her own direction because she is now the agent of her own life. She's not hooking her life onto someone else to provide it for her. So these are the things that a village does. It looks at the individual and says, okay, what do we do, little ants in our colony? How do we make
Come
magic
together,
happen? And then you find the way. And so I love that. I love the magic that happens in a community.
I love the work that you're doing. Just hearing you talk about it and the passion and just the glow when you talk about this work, and also just making us aware of the reality that we are sometimes so oblivious to. Like the reality that you are talking about, honestly, I as a South African, I don't think about it, you know, because when we think foster care, we only think something that happens in a movie or in a Netflix series. And the way you are putting it together, it's like, this is our reality here in South Africa. It really is our reality here in South Africa. And is our government supporting foster care and specifically the work that you are doing enough?
So they support it in theory. They support the idea of foster care. They like it a lot. Like they prefer it to putting children into children's home, for example.
Well, I mean, that's not enough, right?
Well, the problem is that foster care, like I said in the beginning, is a specialist skill. So when I take a child from a difficult place, that child doesn't just need my love. They also need access to proper medical attention. They might need therapy. They may need specialized schooling. None of that comes cheaply, and it's not supported by the government. And even if it is, so if the government said, they can go to Barra and get all the therapy they need, I'm sorry, but in reality, that isn't actually what happens. I've had that. My child needs ADD medicine. So ADD and trauma are very closely related. So now my child isn't thriving at school. The school teacher says he needs medication. My only option is to go through the psychosocial department at Barra. I get an appointment and I see a doctor. I have to wait 6 weeks to see another doctor, but it won't be the same doctor I saw the first time. So it's a bit like starting from scratch every time. I might get a medication that's dispensed to me, but maybe it's not the right one. When I go back and I have some complaints, then I have to start from scratch again. Then they give me a new medication, another 6 weeks. By the time all the 6 weeks are done, that kid has failed the year. I'm frustrated as I'm gone crazy from frustration. My child feels like a loser. You know, these are not adequate interventions for foster care. We need to do better than that. If I need a social worker's advice, 9 times out of 10, I can guarantee you their solution is to move the child. Rather than to bring you a support solution, they'll say, it's not working in foster care with you. I'm going to find a new foster family for this child. And they'll move the child to another foster family who feels more able to take care of the child. So one other thing I just want to mention that families must really understand. Babies are very cute. They are lovely. And when you take them in foster care, you think it's all going to be an easy ride. That trauma is is already in the child. The child has experienced that break, and science has proven that even though you're pre-verbal, that trauma sits in your brain. And later on, when you are starting school and you're trying to access your learning brain, that's where you start to see all of that stuff kind of collapse. And now I'm at age 6 or 7 and I'm trying to learn to read or do maths and I'm struggling. That's where a lot of foster care breakdowns happen, where families say, look, I had the cute baby. This isn't what I signed up for. A child who needs therapy and OT and this and that. Then the families are like, you know what, this is more expensive than I can manage. Or the child starts to behave badly and then they get disciplined inappropriately and there's all sorts of collapse in the family. Starts to put pressure on the relationships. It's really hard. It's not for sissies. Parenting is not for sissies, but foster parenting is really for the courageous.
I can only imagine.
Sure.
It sounds as if the government is not doing much. And I think as a community here on Unlocked, how can we help?
Support places like ours, and there are a lot. I mean, Embrace Village is one, but there are several that I know of that are really trying to do what they call family strengthening work. So this means going upstream, keeping children in their families as best we can. But when there's a break, then equipping the proxy families, the foster or adoptive families with the right skills, the right tools to do this properly. We run several workshops. We do a lot of work, but it doesn't come cheap, right? This is expertise that's been hard won. 30 years of journeying down a trauma-like avenue has equipped us as experts, but it's costly to try and give all of this information to people and still run an organization. Can only happen with support. So I really would encourage people to find organizations like us. I mean, we're on embracevillage.com, the website. We're on social media, Embrace Village, at also TLC Children's Center. You'll see lots of the work and examples of the work we do there. But there are places where you live. I can guarantee it. There are people with amazing hearts doing amazing work to make the world you want to live in. But you have to be a part of it, right? You can't expect it to happen and suddenly you're going to reap the benefits. That's not how it works. Community is a verb. Everybody has to come together, right? Yes, it's come in unity. I always say, right? Come in unity.
Come in unity.
It's the true Ubuntu work. That's what it is.
Yes.
It's the true Ubuntu work. And you have to put your money where your mouth is. And I know it sounds kind of crass, but without money, none of these projects can go forward. And we have to put the money here. The government's not putting the money here, and we can't expect them to. They are oblivious.
Exactly. That's why I'm saying, as the community listening right now and Unlocked, I know we've got a big community. We've got a big family that would love to support you. So I need you to share those details again, but we need to take a quick break and check out your voice notes.
Good times happen to those who follow their own compass, live on their own terms, are hashtag born ready to make genuine connections, just like Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola. The ready-to-drink Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola is the perfect mix, just like the ones you can catch on All Girls on Deck. The taste of a perfect match. Hashtag born ready to enjoy. Tune into All Girls on Deck Saturdays at 6 on Y. Proudly served to you by Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola. Drink responsibly, not for persons under the age of 18.
All right, it's almost time for us to wrap up Unlocked Chats. We're joined by the amazing Pippa Jarvis, who is the managing director of TLC and Embrace Village, from a community of walkover out in the south of Johannesburg. They are doing amazing work, Noni. And I think as the Unlocked family and the Unlocked community, we need to play our part.
Yes,
we absolutely need to play our part.
100% need to. But maybe let's just take a listen to some of your voice notes. Unlocker, what do you have to say?
Hi, Supta, Maloini.
Hello.
Hi, everyone, and hi to the beautiful ladies in studio today. Maloini Wires. Oh my God, what a session. Oh my, Supta, we are with you for from the fun times, and for some weird reason, I'm still listening until this hour, and I think there is a reason for me to also be part of this session.
True.
So grateful for what TLC is doing, and it's so weird because I'm also staying in the south. What I wanted to know is, do they have visiting days where if someone wants to come and assist around running the home, maybe playing with the kids? I know my 2 daughters love kids. If you have days like that, I would really like to be part of it. Do you have a page where if someone wants to maybe bring clothes, toys, for the little ones we can also be part of. If you do have, I would like you to share it with us as the Wires, as you've came to the best station. We are here, we are young, and we want to be part of this beautiful community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntokozo. I love you so much. And thank you for just reaching out. You see what I said, Pippa?
I see. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So obviously it's not just financial donations. People can donate with their time, with clothes.
Absolutely. So we have a great community service offering. People are welcome to visit Monday to Friday. We don't really offer Saturdays anymore because a lot of the children in our center don't attend on a Saturday. So Monday to Fridays. Fridays are best because we have what we call Friendly Friday, which is like a whole community is invited. We spend a lot of time together. It's really fun. Sometimes music going, the kids dancing. It's really, really cool. We accept anything that's pre-loved from any items in your household, your wardrobe, anything like that. We accept in-kind donations of food and groceries. It's a huge need in our community, just keeping food on the table. And you can definitely find us on our socials, which is Embrace Village or TLC Children's Center, Facebook and Instagram, and our website is embracevillage.com. You can find our contact details on there, and we can give you our wish list and let you know all the needs that way.
Love it.
Supta, I don't know if how valued Pippa knows she is. So
right.
I just want to take this moment to say you have been doing this incredible work for 3 decades. If you had to look at Pippa 30 years ago, what do you want to say to her now?
The same thing I say to my children every day. Have courage and be kind. They get you far in life. Just be brave. Say yes when you can. Don't be afraid to say yes. And just be kind while you're doing it. It's not, it's such a privilege to help people and to live every day with purpose.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Pippa, thank you so much for joining us. I just get so emotional right now, and I'm so privileged to have met someone like you. And shout out to Mitla, our producer, for making this possible, because
well done.
The work that you're doing is absolutely amazing, and it's just a blessing for people like Ntokozo to also say, you know what, there's a reason why I'm listening till this time, because on a normal day, maybe she's at home at 8 p.m., but she's listening today because it's special. Yeah. The work that you're doing is special, and you've been doing it for a very long time. May you continue to do so. I'm sure that the Unlocked family will support.
Yes.
I will support. I will make the time.
Yeah.
I'm saying it on record. Noni?
Yes, I'm coming with you. I'm coming with you. I've got a huge lump in my throat from this incredible experience. I think, especially when you do Unlocked chats, we tackle so many difficult issues, and to have a session like this where we get to speak about the incredible work that people do for our children, Supta, it's just remarkable. Thank you so much, Pippa.
Thank you.
Also to your family as well.
Yeah.
Because you're not the only one.
Not the only
you
one.
are
It's a community.
Exactly.
Pippa, have a good evening. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
coming
much.
here.
It was a
And that's how we wrap up Unlocked Chats. Oh man, what a session. What a chat. Oh my goodness. I think Pippa has just made us aware of the reality that's out there.
Yeah.
And we are so busy chasing and chasing and chasing. I think it's time that we just sit back a little bit and help where we can.
Yeah.
Really help where we can.
Really. And I remember, Supta, funny enough, when I was still very, very young, we actually went to a foster home with my mom. And I had so much joy just looking at all those kids and how loved they are.
Yeah.
You literally took me back to that memory. It's probably over 20 years old. Like it's such an old memory. But it just reignited that. Yeah. And the communities are there, like you say, Pippa. There's so many of these communities where they're doing the incredible work that you're doing. So we just have to look out for them, Supta, and do our part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you caught that conversation halfway through, please go check it out on the Y app. It is available on our YFM app. If you don't have the app, you should have it by now. It's available on iOS and on Android. Noni, we're back again tomorrow evening.
I'll see you then.
Thank you.